Welcome to Building the Future, hosted by Kevin Horick. With millions of listeners a month, Building the Future has quickly become one of the fastest rising programs, with a focus on interviewing startups, entrepreneurs, investors, CEOs, and more. The radio and TV show airs in 15 markets across the globe, including Silicon Valley. For full showtimes, past episodes, or to sponsor the show, please visit buildingthefutureshow.com.
Today's show is brought to you by OnPay, the new standard in payroll. You can pay employees and contractors in minutes, automate your payroll taxes and filings, as well as provide health benefits and HR in all 50 states. For more information, visit buildingthefutureshow.com/onpay. Welcome back to the show. Today we have Jay Giraud. He's the founder and CEO of Damon Motorcycles. Jay, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on the show. I think what you guys are doing at Damon Motorcycle is actually very innovative and cool. But maybe before we get into all that, let's get to know you a little bit better and start off with where you grew up.
Sounds good. Yeah. So I grew up in North Vancouver, BC, which is in Canada.
Very cool. Very nice area. Close to the mountains.
It's not. Yeah, close to several mountains. It's not what people think of Canada. It's a lot more like Seattle, actually. Pretty mild. Oftentimes you could go a whole year without any snow on the ground. Sea level, kind of like Seattle and San Francisco slammed together with cool. Canadian quality of life.
Interesting. So you went to some university. Do you want to talk about that and what did you take and walk us through that journey?
Well, so not exactly. When I was 17, I moved out. And that was grade 11. I also dropped out. Okay. So I dropped out of high school for the most part because at that point I'd been kicked out of my house at home like 30 or 40 times, and I was getting sick of being kicked out. So I thought it was time I actually moved out. Gotcha. And the high school, I didn't relate to people in high school who actually didn't want to learn and therefore provided an environment that was not conducive to learning. So I dropped out of high school so that I could attend adult night school. And I had 3 jobs at the time while I was in high school. So I turned one of those jobs into a full-time job. I kept one of the other ones as a part-time job. And I started adult night school among 20 to 30-year-olds in classes that were 3 hours long where people actually wanted to learn. So I got my high school graduation in adult night school while, working full-time and a half.
Interesting. Okay, so
and then university never happened.
Okay.
Yeah, university never happened. I turned one of those jobs into managing a coffee shop, which turned into selling coffee shop franchises at the age of 18. Wow. I helped sell a handful of coffee shop franchises, and at 20, I can picture this like it was yesterday. At 20, I was standing in front of one coffee shop, looking up at the mountain, which was covered in snow. And I had suddenly recalled that as a teenager, I dreamed of being a professional snowboarder. And somehow I got so busy in the business of being an adult that I forgot about that dream. And I haven't said that to anybody before, but so I quit my job. I just quit. And 6 months later, I moved to Whistler to become a freestyle professional snowboarder. And everything changed.
Okay. Well, wait. Most people,
we haven't even gotten to university yet, but
yeah, well, there's that. And most people, like, you were like a really big name snowboarder for a number of years, at least across Canada, if not globally. Is that fair to say?
Honestly, my name wasn't that known, but my scores were pretty darn good. I was number 1 in BC in half pipe, big air, slope style, and border cross.
Sure.
And I was number 9 in border cross in Canada, and I was number 89 in half pipe in the year 1998.
Got you.
Number 89 in half pipe in the world.
Okay, very cool.
So I had a top 100 ranking in the world in 98.
Wow.
And I think I was pretty well known around Canada. I did a little bit of media stuff where I'd appear in magazines and videos, but I did a lot of competition.
Sure. But I think majority of people trained for that and to be that good for a number of years. They don't just kind of fall back into it.
No, it was a a lot of fun.
No.
But I eventually, at some point after like 5-6 years, had a compounding set of injuries that became more and more difficult to live with, let alone compete with.
Got you.
And so that's really where my life started to pivot.
Okay, so walk us through that journey up until Damon.
Oh my God. So in the 5 or 6 years that I was snowboarding, you make some money from your sponsors and you make some money from contests, but it doesn't pay the bills. So in between your seasons, your snowboard seasons, which there are 2 or 3 in a year, your winter, your summer, and your fall, you can hike and get to the snow. You've got jobs, and I shit you not. I hope I can swear.
It's all good.
I've had more than 80 jobs in my life, and they average to 4 months per job, which is not ironic because 4 months is about the time you have in an off season. So I've worked in restaurants, I've worked in garden centers, I've built buildings, I've done everything.
Interesting.
And that's just, paying the bills and keeping life fluid. In between your aspirations to make $1 million from snowboarding, which nobody does except for like 3 people. And so in that time frame, at some point, I took a desktop publishing diploma, which was a joke because it was a private company that pretended to offer real diplomas, and all it did is teach me how to use Microsoft Office and Photoshop a little bit. And I can't really call it desktop publishing, but technically speaking, I have a diploma in digital sales and marketing, which is desktop publishing. And I did learn a bit from it, to be honest. I ended up building a snowboard coaching course. I trained the Korean national snowboard team. I coached junior national athletes in snowboarding, built my own website because I learned how to do that in desktop publishing.
Awesome.
But in 2003, I think it was, I was in Whistler, BC, nursing some injuries, wondering if I was going to have a future anymore in snowboarding. And the bombing of Baghdad happened. And so this was the beginning of the Iraq War. And I was working at a bar, watching the bombs hit the city on these big TV screens. And I was so beside myself that that CNN could tell us this was about democracy and freedom or some shit, that I spent the next 5 years of my life trying to think about how to get the world off oil. And in that time, I worked at car dealerships. I worked at 2 motorcycle dealerships. One was Honda, the other was Harley. And I became top salesperson at those dealerships, ended up managing the dealerships and doubling revenue. And then in 2007, I started to get these excruciating headaches. And I've never been a person to get headaches. I've never been a person to be depressed. I've never been a person to not be pretty darn happy all the time. But I was in a really bad state for 4 months.
Wow.
Until I realized what it was is I was avoiding what I really wanted to do. And that was to help get the world off oil. And like, I'm getting emotional just thinking about it right now. It was the scariest moment of my life because I didn't know how to pay rent, and it was Christmas, and I was quitting my job, and I was telling the general manager that I had to start an electric car company. And, I'd come from snowboarding. I'm not a physicist. I don't know how to build batteries. I'm going to build an electric car company in Vancouver.
Interesting.
So I said, come hell or high water, in 2008, I will put an electric car on the road, and I don't know how. And in March 2008, a Ford dealership liked my idea that I had somehow gotten word to this Ford dealership. I can't remember how. And he donated a Ford truck to me. And I raised a little bit of money from some friends, and I hired a couple of engineers, and we converted a Ford truck to electric.
Oh, very cool.
And then this is, it took 4 months to do that. It was lead acid batteries. There was 1,200 pounds of batteries in the back of this truck. It was, piece of crap, but it was an electric one that I drove every day. And I put out a press release that said that that Rev Technologies had the first electric car showroom in Canada, because technically we had an electric car in a room.
Sure. And
I got flooded with opportunities from this press release. Now, gas prices were the highest they'd ever been at this moment in time.
Sure.
So that helped. And sure enough, that helped me raise about $250,000, which built us another prototype. We started converting Ford SUVs to electric. We built an AC drive system. We brought in lithium ion. We started building our own power inverter. Then I learned about this thing called vehicle to grid. And vehicle to grid is where you can feed energy from the battery back into the power grid in a fashion that's synchronized with the national grid. thereby allowing you to use vehicles as distributed energy storage, which is the holy grail. Well, it's Tesla, it's Powerwall. It's what they're doing right now.
Right.
And so we were doing this back in 08, 09. And when we started getting into this, we started building the software, hardware capability on board the vehicle and in the cloud to use these vehicles to manage the power grid. And the opportunity for the U.S. Army was to turn military microgrids into resilient energy systems that reduced fuel consumption. So fast forward 4 more years of this, and Rev Technologies was in fact helping the world get off oil. Not in any huge scalable way yet, but it was a bit of my idea for my life to be realized. And we won military contracts and utility contracts, and we were doing some pretty far out stuff that Tesla is just beginning to do now.
Wow, very cool.
Yeah,
so
it was good fun.
So walk us through the rest of that up until kind of Damon. Like, what happened to Rev?
So in 2012, we had distributed or sold almost 25, I think 23 of these SUVs at a price of $200,000 each. They are still in use today on military bases and in Detroit and with Chrysler and with some U.S. cities. And they were able to balance the energy from the grid, as I said. But it was just a non-scalable play. So I had another idea at the time, which was, how do we connect, instead of selling expensive electric cars to the Army, how do I get 10 million cars to make 5% fuel improvement? Because that's a way better way to get the world off oil if you could affect each and every driver. Natural gas prices tanked and obliterated my energy resale business in Rev. So we had to pivot Rev.
Okay.
So I carried 47 shareholders, and I gave them half of my founding stock in a business I started called Mogio. And so I founded Mogio. Over 4 years. We built what's become the fastest growing and one of the largest consumer connected car platforms in the world, which is distributed by 9 wireless carriers in 7 countries and has collected about 7 petabytes of automotive data that's never before been collected. But we also built apps that allowed people to gamify the way they drive to reduce their fuel consumption. So it's an open platform for apps for cars. And the Mogio, we raised money from Deutsche Telekom, T-Mobile, Amazon.
Wow.
Now there's Bosch is in there, and Assurance is in there, and Trend Micro is in there, and it's been a very successful connected car play. So I ran that company for 4 years, and then we brought in a growth CEO in 2016, and I went off to Jakarta for my best friend's wedding.
Okay.
In that summer. And Jakarta is the world that I dreamed of, where I thought, wouldn't it be cool if all the cars on the road were motorbikes? I think that'd be way better, because I've been riding motorbikes and loving motorbikes my whole life. But it was not cool. It was insane. It was really scary and dangerous. And I came away from Jakarta, thinking that technology can solve the chaos of millions of motorbikes on the road. They can move as a hive.
Right.
And I don't know how yet. I was thinking about drones, and I was thinking about flying cars and stuff like that. And I was thinking there's a way to get motorcycles to move as a hive, where millions of people can move really easily and freely, have a high freedom of mobility, own a vehicle that's not wider than their shoulders, that is much, much lighter on the planet and safer, but they don't have to pilot it themselves if they didn't want to, and where they could, move along a busy freeway together as one group. And, that future is at least 15 years away.
Okay.
But that's ultimately what's at the heart of Damon, is to transform personal mobility. I desire to get the world off oil. And if you don't get motorbikes off oil, it'll never happen, because more people ride a motorbike every day than those that drive a car. It's a much bigger number of people, about 1.5 billion people. But motorcyclists, their strong desire is not to get themselves off oil. Their strong desire is to ride a motorcycle that's safer. It's the family van of most of the world. So I paired up the need of the motorcyclist for safety with my need to get the world off oil. And that really meant we had to reinvent the motorbike.
Okay. So when you say you had to reinvent the motorbike, obviously you probably started with some prototypes, or walk us through the early stages of Damon. Yeah.
So we thought about, everything from electrification to, how do you make a motorcycle safer? How do you make it smarter? Connectivity, cloud computing, over-the-air updates. How do you make it perpetually better? ergonomics, rideability. There's a lot of categories there. Ride sharing, mobility as a service, virtualization. We looked at all of that, and gut instincts told me that safety was going to be the number one most difficult thing, because I did not at the time believe that we could actually make a motorcycle safer, and my goal is to make it 10 times safer.
Interesting.
And so that's a pretty high goal, and so we said, okay, well, you know what, we gotta look through a straw here and focus in on the biggest unknown, and that is motorcycle safety, which are two strange words that you never hear together. So we started thinking about ADAS, collision warning systems, where a system that is able to compute on board and learn from itself and get better over time, a bit like a Tesla.
Okay.
And we started playing with LiDARs and cameras and radar and neural nets and object detection and tracking, segmentation, the whole bit. And we brought in the people to develop prototypes. In just a couple of months, we built a full LiDAR prototype and a full camera prototype. And we started figuring out all of the trade-offs between cost of computing and cost of sensors and, all of the weaknesses of each. And over the last 3 years, we've developed 4 generations of our collision warning system that we call Copilot. We've had over 100 people test it, from the LA police force to executives at Honda, Suzuki, Yamaha, to major media from Forbes magazine and Cycle World. And we're at a point where 100% of people that ride our bikes are convinced that this is a safer motorcycle, so much so that they are uncomfortable when they get back on their own bike after getting used to ours.
Wow. So I want to step back for just a second. How did you fund all this, and how did you make all those connections to some really big players in the space to actually test out your product?
It's a good question. Grit.
Okay.
I'm going to pivot. I'm going to circle back to education for a second.
Sure.
I love reading, these gurus who talk about the importance of education and university and college and training. And honestly, I wish I could have built my own prototype. I would have saved a lot of money and a lot of dilution in the early days if I could have built my own prototype. But I wouldn't have 2 things you'll never get in school.
Sure.
And that's resilience and grit.
100%.
And, I got 2 boys, and the boy's mom is, believes very heavily in university, and I'm going to push them to university as hard as she will. But if they don't want to go, I'm not going to insist, because I would never trade what I've learned from, 80 jobs and years and years of scraping by on noodles and ketchup to get to the next snowboard contest, because that's what I wanted to do. And that develops the kind of perseverance that you need to get over one insanely impossible hurdle after another. And the only reason we are successful in my previous companies, and hopefully with Damon, is because when it was time to lie down and be dead, we just didn't. Yeah. And yeah, it makes all the difference. So it's just turning over one bloody rock after another until you get to where you want to get to.
No, I love how you are open to talk about that, because you're right. The thing that always, as somebody that went to university, all the knowledge that you want, whether you go to university or not, is online and or in a textbook, and you can get it, all the same knowledge, outside of a traditional kind of classroom. Totally. And I'm not saying don't go to university. I'm just saying there's other ways to get it, and you got to figure out what works for you. And I am tired of those 10 things you need to do to be successful in life lists, or 10 things people do before 6 a.m. It's if you're not a morning person, don't force yourself to be a morning person just because you read some list. It always found it so fascinating to me.
Totally.
It's you need to figure out what works for you. Right. And I love that you're willing to share that. Right. So I'm curious.
My 2 boys
go
are
ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. My 2 boys are really interesting. My older boy is 11, and he's so much like his mom.
Okay.
And my younger boy is 7, and he's so much like me. And it's really interesting to watch, because we're super different, his mom and I, how we approach life. And my older guy, he'll study and observe and then methodically learn. And my younger kid is dead set on doing everything the hard way until he figures it out his way, which is my mom's number one complaint about me. She's so sick and tired of repeating herself that I have to do everything the hard way. And like screwing up a lot is a really good way to learn things.
Sure.
It's infinitely better than being told how to learn something. So it's not knowledge that I'm talking about. It's resourcefulness and combined with perseverance, it's pretty deadly. So, that's ultimately how we've gotten to what we've gotten to. I mean, up until CES of this year, it was extremely hard to get anybody to pay any attention to Damon because no one gives a shit about motorbiking, especially Silicon Valley that's so focused on the self-driving car, which is only for a minority of the population, which will be a shrinking minority. So, it's a misnomer that the self-driving car is going to change the world. It's not. I don't even know if it's in the future in 50 years.
Interesting. I guess I never really realized how big, I guess I should have thought that the motorcycle population or people that ride motorcycles is way more than cars. I never really occurred to me. I never really put any thought in it, but I'm curious why you say that about self-driving cars.
Well, because we have collision warning systems in a category of technology called ADAS, Advanced Driver Assistance, which is like lane departure warning and adaptive cruise control. In the industry, it's level 3 of automation. So there's 5 levels of self-driving cars. It's level 3. Teslas are level 3, for example. And I have a Tesla, and it drives itself all the time. I think it's awesome. But we are already getting such vast improvements of safety from level 2 and level 3 collision warning and collision detection systems but they're not self-learning. These are not connected vehicles today, other than Teslas. Most all cars have a radar and a camera that's as dumb as it was the day it came off the assembly line. It's never going to get smarter. It's not getting algorithm updates. It's not learning from other General Motors or other Toyota cars. Right. It's as good as it was the day it shipped. But a self-learning one, a connected vehicle with an advanced warning system that can perpetually get safer from millions of other ones we're going to close this gap from 40% accident reduction to 70%, 80%, 90%. And if people don't have to give up driving, that doesn't mean they won't. When it's convenient to give up driving, you will. But if you talk to anybody with a Tesla, they use autopilot like 10 to 15% of the time. Right. It works really, really well. So they're not using it because it doesn't work well. They're not using it because they enjoy driving. And it's just, so I think it's going to take decades for new generation of kids to come along and not see the point in driving. But they're still going to be attracted to the allure of driving. And so we're never going to get rid of driving, and not to mention the fact that it's a smaller market. Motorcycles outnumber cars. They outsell cars 2 to 1 every year.
Interesting.
And if you go to Delhi or you go to Jakarta, you are at such a massive disadvantage getting in a car. It takes you 3 times longer to go the same distance because of the millions of motorbikes that will swarm around your car, pushing you backwards as they take the front line. So, they don't want a car. And if you drop a self-driving car into that chaos, it will freeze. It's not going to crawl forward because so many motorbikes will come within inches of it.
Right.
So,
I never really thought of it like that. Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Yeah. Okay. So I want to get back into Damon. You quickly covered what you guys are doing, but let's dive a bit deeper into what exactly Damon is. And you guys have a couple models, and as far as I understand, you guys sold out of one of them, correct?
Well, pre-sold. I'm never going to oversell our numbers, so we pre-sold.
That's still a big deal.
Deposits. Yeah, it's a good deal. Yeah.
So let's. Keep going. Sorry.
Yeah, Damon is the future of motorcycling.
Okay.
And motorcycling, this is where we get controversial. Motorcycling is the future of mobility. In fact, that's silly. Motorcycling is the present of mobility because there's 1.5 billion people on motorbikes and there's 1.2 billion people in cars. So motorcycling is already the present mobility worldwide. But motorcycling really has not, and without companies like Damon and others to come in and disrupt things, motorcycling hasn't evolved really in 100 years. It's still a combustion engine. They've only now gone fuel injection in most countries. Only now, ABS is still only on 8% of the world's motorbikes, but motorbiking is the number 1 form of transportation worldwide. And if you don't have a motorbike or access to one, you can't get to work. You can't walk to the factory on the outskirts of Jakarta. And if you twist your ankle on a Sunday playing soccer with your friends, you can't ride your motorbike because you need all 4 limbs to ride a motorbike. Therefore, you lose your job because you work at a factory like 9 out of 10 people out there, and you'll be replaced.
Gotcha.
So, motorcycling has to evolve dramatically, and it will become a form of personal mobility over the next 10 to 15 years, where you could sit in some capsule-like pod that you can pilot. But if you don't, and you don't avoid that accident, it will avoid for you. So it's a semi-automated system, if you will.
Right.
And you could also have it act as part of a swarm of other pod-like vehicles that may have more than 2 wheels, that will be much safer for these masses of people, so that their economies aren't being impacted 3, 4, 5% GDP just because of accidents, which is the reality they live in today.
Right. Interesting.
Today's show is brought to you by OnPay, the new standard in payroll. You can pay employees and contractors in minutes, automate your payroll taxes and filings, as well as provide health benefits and HR in all 50 states. For more information, visit buildingthefutureshow.com/onpay.
So walk us through some of the other features of Damon and how kind of the software integrates into the bikes.
So yeah, the Damon Hypersport is a 100% electric motorcycle, really designed to displace the incumbents. And, that's a bold statement, and it may not happen with the first version of our bike, but suffice to say, the industry has been not really all that receptive to change, to making motorcycles better. And I think that's a big part of why over and over again, we see a tripling of used motorcycle sales over the last 15 years, but we see a drop in motorcycle sales by half in the United States on the new motorcycle front, because the 2020 and doesn't really have anything different from the 2018 or the 2017, except if you look back a few years, the price of the bike you want is half price. So why would you buy a brand new motorcycle when, for a lot of people, motorcycling is, something they spend discretionary income on? It's something they do on weekends. It's not a must-have for their lives. So they, if the 2020 is incrementally better than the 2017, you're just going to buy the 2017. So, whereas something like Damon comes in and we're pushing record-breaking performance on horsepower, range, acceleration, not just 0 to 60, but 0 to 100 in under 4 seconds. So, between that third and fourth second, the amount of pull to go from 60 to 100 miles per hour is breathtaking. It's pretty extraordinary, I got to say. And no other motorcycle can even claim that today. So this kind of focus on innovation and focus on mass level disruption, I think will make for a really exciting bike. And we don't really emphasize that it's electric. That's just what it has to be to give you that kind of performance.
Yeah, interesting. No, that makes a lot of sense. But how do you guys integrate software into that as well? Because as far as I understand, that really hasn't come to bikes like it has cars. Is that correct?
Well, not entirely. I mean, we have motorcycles today. I mean, if you go out and buy a $20,000 to $30,000 super sport motorbike, it has traction control, it has anti-lock brakes, it has stability control, it has anti-wheelie control. Some of them have what they call curve ABS, which is a predictive level of anti-lock brakes that help engage the brakes on a hard lean, so in a more subtle way. And with a car, you don't mess with traction control. It's just always on. Whereas with a motorcycle, like my gas motorbike, I think I have 6 levels of traction control, so you can really fine tune this stuff. Of course, these are not for safety reasons so much as they're for performance reasons on the racetrack. So it's we don't see a lot of ABS and traction control on bikes under $20,000. It's almost non-existent. 8% of the world's motorbikes have ABS. And, when you look at the safety stats, where half of all motorcycle riders were found to have taken no evasive action before a collision, then even if you have ABS and traction control, but you don't have time to pull the brakes before it's too late, it's pretty useless. So, from a safety perspective, we've seen very little innovation, but on the very high-end motorbikes, there's a lot of software for fine-tuning the edge of the tire when you're pushing the limits, so to speak.
Interesting. Okay. So how are you guys leveraging some of that tech, and how are you advancing that tech in Damon?
Well, that tech is quite literally an off-the-shelf bundle. It's
Okay.
it's a 9-level ECU, 9-level IMU with ECU kit that you can get from Bosch, Continental, Delphi. All the big players make this kind of this tech stack available as practically as a bolt-on. I mean, it has to be very fine-tuned, which takes about a year. But none of that really. That's just sort of on the layer. Our software on the bike is very multifaceted. First off, we have an operating system which is delivered by BlackBerry QNX. It's a kernel layer operating system, one of the most robust and stable systems in the world. You'll find it in about 85% of the world's cars. And on top of that system is our ECU and our onboard computer that interfaces to all of the edge computing network that we have on the bike. So we run a neural net on the bike that interfaces to all of the different sensors, the radars, the cameras. We have non-visual sensors like infrared and beamforming microphones that do very advanced things that you would never expect a motorcycle to do. And that really makes up the bike's situational awareness, its ability to perceive its environment in real time, its ability to perceive the rider's behavior, and its ability to perceive the traffic environment. What is the traffic doing on a wet road in a 3-lane intersection, 53 feet before you enter that intersection? What's going on then? And how is that going to play into the risks of the rider? So it's pretty sophisticated. Of course, it interfaces to a 4G telematics unit. So we have Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and NFC, 4G, a GPS, and we aren't computing off the bike. All the computing is done on the bike, but we do have the backhaul connectivity with the cloud if needed.
Interesting. Okay. So how do you guys do some of that safety stuff? Because it's got to be a little bit tricky. I know, like, obviously there's a bunch of companies doing it with cars. As far as I know, you guys are one of the first to do it kind of with motorbikes. But how are you guys kind of leveraging what's currently there and then building on top of that?
Yeah, I think that's a really fascinating question. And so I'm going to backpedal a little bit
Sure.
before I dive in deep. So first of all, let's take the state of the art with cars. So cars, you have a forward radar and a rear radar. Pardon me. No, you have a forward radar. You may have a rear ultrasonic radar on a car, strictly for backup functionality, to give you a distance between you and the garage door, for example, or another car.
Okay.
And then you have side radar. You might have cameras on a car, depending on the car you're buying. And they are, the forward sensing system and the side sensing system are completely islanded from one another. So there is no reason under the sun, as far as the automakers are concerned, that your blind spot detection system needs to communicate with your forward collision system. And so they don't. And then secondly, they're not connected to the internet, which means they don't ever get smarter. They don't get better. Your Hyundai Sonata is not going to learn from other Hyundais. It just doesn't work that way. They don't have any 4G connectivity. They don't have the business models. They don't have the wireless carrier relationships to enable all of that. And they don't know how to charge customers for the connectivity and the data that it would require. And so none of that exists. And the stack on the car cannot do any of that. And frankly, none of it is made by Hyundai. It's made by, Bosch or Continental. And it's really all about mass sales and commoditization.
Interesting.
On a Tesla or on a Damon, we have a system that is hyper intelligent. So we have, a full rear collision warning system, side collision warning system, front collision warning system, and all of our onboard edge network computing devices. By edge, I mean each one of them is modularized as an architecture on board the bike, and they talk to each other. And so this is a lot like having a bird's eye view of a motorbike. So if you could imagine a drone at 100 feet looking down on your motorbike and looking down at the traffic and being able to see from that bird's eye view every which direction all of the traffic is headed, you could very easily predict what the traffic is going to do in the next few seconds. If a car is racing up behind you really fast, pulls into a lane on the left, and then cuts in front of you, which I cannot tell you how many times that's happened to me on a motorbike,
Sure.
Our system can predict that, right? It can track the speed and the velocity of the car behind me. It can warm up or preload the blind spot detection system as that car passes from behind you to the side, and then anticipate the car's behavior to pull into the front and cut you off, because they just don't see motorbikes. They don't mean to cut us off. They just do. And that gives the bike the ability to respond at a much faster rate no matter what the traffic is doing and no matter what the different differential speeds are between the cars and the motorbikes. And then, of course, every time that kind of behavior happens, our system records that and puts it in the cloud. So if I get warned of a threat, if I get warned of a car about to cut me off through a haptic vibration in my handlebar, and I respond by pulling the brake, then the system takes that positive response from the rider, and it knows without a doubt it correlated that situation correctly. It tags that whole 30-second scenario, pushes it to the cloud, and our engineers on the other side, disseminate that data times 100 and build a new update. That makes for a smarter bike that can more likely predict that situation next time.
Interesting. So you're basically using AI and kind of human validation for that AI to better the riding experience and make it safer for kind of everyone that's using a Damon motorcycle. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, well, I hate to say this, but there's about 600 humans behind Amazon Alexa listening to every single conversation I have in my house right now.
Sure.
And that's what the industry currently calls AI.
Sure.
So yeah.
Interesting. No, that's interesting because I think it seems to me, even outside of kind of what you guys are doing, more and more AI projects are adding humans back in for some sort of validation, because we've finally figured out that we can get to a certain point at this point in history with AI, but we still need that human intervention to make sure what it's suggesting or doing is validated by a human. And it's cool that you're open to talk about that, because I think a lot of people are still like, no, it's 100% AI. It's like, no, it isn't. You're just lying to everybody.
Yeah, everydy's lying to everybody. The whole industry's lying. The whole industry's lying about self-driving cars in every which way, by the way. But that's another ball of wax. But no, absolutely. I mean, in the case of Alexa making a joke that is timed just right, fine. We need humans in the background of that. In the case of a motorbike that's going to get a software update that will go from detecting an accident to predicting one, I mean, we're talking about flawlessness.
Right.
Absolute flawlessness before we ship it. So it's one thing that there's humans in the background building the next software update by literally watching video footage of bike situation after situation, and then working the algorithms to better improve that predictability. Then we've got to put that algorithm into a software simulator, which we've built entirely already.
Wow.
And where we actually test the algorithm in a simulated city motorcycle riding environment. And we do that 100 times. And then we put it on a couple of prototype bikes and send it out into the wild with employee test riders for an indeterminable amount of time. And then we slowly release updates. I mean, it'll take that process in the beginning is going to be at least a year. And we're going to need at least 1,000 bikes worth of data before we start doing software updates. So this is, out into the, couple years away from now future, but it's absolutely the roadmap. It's the technology we're baking in at the sensor level now. And to do this in 3 to 5 years, we have to be a data-driven company today. At the very onset of the company, the architecture, the plans, the designs, the kind of data we're collecting, the patents we're writing, the people we're hiring, the know-how we're looking for, all of that has to be understood and really baked in now.
No, I 100%, that makes a lot of sense, right? Because especially when it's this life or death thing, like, sure, if I'm talking to Alexa and it's, a human needs to check something, there's nothing, as far as I understand, that really puts my life in danger if Alexa screws that up, right? But obviously, if you guys push a software update,
totally
it's
different.
bad. Yeah, it's totally different. And it's great that you guys are spending that much time and effort testing, because I think in a lot of cases, not a lot of other kind of companies doing this kind of stuff are testing that thoroughly, just based on what I've kind of read. So I'm curious, though, how do you decide which types of features is maybe the wrong word for it, but like you just mentioned, if a car comes from behind you and is about to cut off, how do you decide what scenarios you guys are going to work into your software, whether it's today, tomorrow, or in a year or two?
Yeah, that's a cool question. So I'll give you kind of two answers to that. The first is there is not a ton of accident reports on motorcycles that have been studied over the years, but there are some, and the ones that there are very deep. So we've, digested those ad nauseum, reverse engineered everything, figured out what all the, variables are in that cause accidents. What are the behaviors and variables? What are the forensics of motorcycle accident data? And actually, some of it's really interesting, and I've published it in summary in a white paper, which used to be on our website. I can email it to you if you're interested.
Sure.
And things like in 5% of motorcycle accidents, excessive speed is a factor, but in 95% of motorcycle accidents, speed is not a factor. And so there are a lot of assumptions that are dispelled. So it's one thing to know that, and by having that data, we know historically in various geographies what are the most common types of accidents. And the top three, almost again and again and again in every country, is being T-boned in an intersection,
right,
hitting a car from behind in an intersection, and being hit from behind while stopped at a red light. Those are the top three almost universally around the world. And so if you could reduce, and those make up 2/3 of all motorcycle accidents. And so, yeah, our system deals with those top three: the being hit from behind, being hit in the front, and T-boning, all in the intersections. And again, those would be if all we ever did were those three, we'd be taking a big bite out of motorcycle accidents worldwide. Then there's 7 or 8 more that are reported in lesser percentages throughout the world. 7 or 8 more use cases of how people end up in motorcycle accidents. And let's not forget that 1/3 of them are caused by the rider, which is a different ball of wax we could talk about. So as we start collecting more and more camera data, so there's a potential accident, the bike detects it, it warns the rider, the video footage goes to the cloud, we watch that video footage. As we start to determine and see our own patterns of what the kind of 4th, 5th, and 6th use cases really are from our own recorded data, we'll then build algorithms to deal with those.
Interesting. Okay, so you said another quarter is the rider themselves. Do you want to give us some examples of that?
About 1/3, yeah. So it's inattentiveness, drinking, it's inability. So it's target fixation. A rider going through a curve sees a cliff on the right, a cliff wall, focuses on that instead of focusing on the road and runs into the cliff. Those things happen a lot. Motorcyclists get target fixation, and motorcyclists make mistakes, or they're pushing the bike up beyond their ability level. These are Western problems, not so much Eastern problems.
Okay.
People who have motorcycles that are too powerful for their skill level. Yeah, those kinds of things. And actually, we have quite a number of ways we can and will deal with those that will make every rider basically a rock star and not be able to make those kinds of human errors anymore. And it's not semi-autonomous riding, but it is a level of throttle and control intervention where the bike is calculating, highway curvatures and lean angles to determine max throttle and minimum angle needed to get through the turn, and then actually just smoothing out rider error. So there's some things we're going to do in that regard, but that's way down the list of what causes accidents.
Interesting. Yeah, no, that's actually really quite fascinating, because obviously, like, you're a way more skilled rider than I've only ridden a motorbike a few times in my life. So obviously, like, you're going to be, and like, if I was to ride your bike, for example, you could almost tailor my riding experience to my level on your bike. Maybe not today, but like down the road, just based on like software input, or you change some settings. Is that kind of what you mean at a high level?
Somewhat. And we're nudging towards some of our proprietary know-how now, but
okay.
Something like that. Yeah. It's a little bit like, I'll say it in a metaphor. Everybody who wants to ride a motorbike or jump out of a plane and skydive or do anything quote unquote risky, they want to feel more alive. They don't actually want to flirt with death, right? So, but they want to feel more alive. They want to feel like they're taking risks. They want to, boost up their testosterone and pound their chest like a man, but they don't actually want to put their lives at stake.
Right.
So, that's why we get on roller coasters that have these lockdown restraints, because it's really exciting, but there's really no chance of death. And so, a motorcycle is the same way. A lot of motorcyclists talk about the purity of riding and I don't want software intervening with my ride because, that's not motorcycling. Then it's just like, it's cheating. That's what they always say. It's cheating. Well, we're all trying to cheat death, actually. So if we can make motorcycling feel exciting and feel exhilarating, and you can get on a deeper lean angle sooner, and it augments your ability level, but it's also quietly taking away that risk, nobody's going to turn that down. And that's actually what curve ABS and traction control do on super bikes today. I mean, I've had it where my traction control was cutting the throttle on a racetrack, and the white traction control light is flashing so hard until I stand the bike up, and suddenly I've got all this power again. So the bike was taking away power because I was leaning over too far. And had the bike been delivering that power, it would have spun the rear tire and I would have fallen. And it made me better. I was cutting a few seconds off my lap times because of it, right? So I'm a rock star now, but it really wasn't skill, it was software.
Interesting. Yeah, no, it's cool how, like, or that how software can correct some of that stuff, right? And in your case, like, but avoid you falling off the bike. But I love how, like, kind of the human and kind of software combined, you can really get better, and you can really, like, push things to kind of the next level, right? Which is always really quite fascinating to me.
Totally. Yeah, you move through the learning curves faster. You are technology aided, but give me a 1900 era tennis racket and put me up against yourself with a modern carbon fiber racket that actually uses synthetic, I'm not even sure the name of those things inside the racket, the strings.
Sure. Yeah.
And you're going to kick the crap out of me. You're going to put velocity on that ball that I couldn't dream of. We don't look at a modern tennis racket and call that technology, but compared to an old tennis racket, it sure as hell is. And
Sure.
so do you have this unfair technological advantage? Absolutely. And it's going to make you a better tennis player.
Sure. Well, and then too, like, if it makes me safer on the road riding a motorbike, like, it's kind of a no-brainer, right?
Totally. Yeah. No, it's just a funny thing. We have an old generation of motorcyclists that will tell you that they don't want software technology messing with the purity of riding. But, meanwhile, their ankle is fused because they broke it motorcycling 30 years ago, and they're riding a motorcycle with an automatic transmission because of that. So,
Yeah,
motorcyclists talk out of both sides of the mouth all the time. It's pretty funny. But, interestingly, what we've seen, I'm not sure if we've talked about this yet, but we've had an extraordinary number of orders for an expensive motorbike, an expensive electric motorbike that doesn't make noise and doesn't have gears and all the things that riders say they're not willing to give up. We have an amazing number of orders for this bike. And 35% of them are millennials. 35% of them are under the age of 34, buying a $25,000 electric motorbike, a 200 horsepower electric motorbike. It's shocking. I mean, the entire motorcycle industry worldwide is trying to figure out how to get millennials to ride motorbikes. And I don't know if we're going to have that problem.
Well, but I think in your guys' case, like, it's environmentally friendly, it's safer, and honestly, it's cheaper than buying a car. And most people, I'm 36, just for some context, it's like most people, even I know, try to get away with one car, or one of their cars is an electric car, or some of them just ride a normal pedal bike, right? And so I think people are getting more and more conscious about not only spending a ton of money, like, it's not that hard to spend $50,000-$60,000 on a car or truck or whatever you need, right? But if you're just going to and from work or school, or maybe it's your second vehicle, you don't need to spend, tens and thousands of dollars just to get to and from work, right? And I think you guys are filling that hole. That's
exactly.
My best guess.
There's this excessiveness in mass and metal and space taken up on the road, and this excessiveness of cost. I mean, everybody spends $500 to $1,000 a month making a car payment for something that they use for about 55 minutes of their day. I mean, it's weird, right? If you really look at 100%. It, it's super weird. Yeah, and so I'm really interested. We're going to be talking to a lot of our customers now over the next while. I'm really interested in knowing how many of them bought this motorcycle in lieu of buying a car.
Sure. No,
and I'm really interested in that.
That's fair enough. So we're kind of coming to the end of the show. So where can people actually reserve a motorbike? And let's mention any other links you want to talk about where people can get more information about you guys.
For sure. So we are at DamonMotorcycles.com. Damon is spelt like Matt Damon. And you can pre-order the bike there. It's a $100 reservation for the Hypersport HS. And if you keep your eyes tuned to the website around the end of this month, there's going to be a very big update, some very big news, and some exciting new stuff on there too. So make sure you sign up for the newsletter, which is at the bottom of the homepage, I believe. Yeah. We've just got a ton of exciting things to talk about over the coming months.
Perfect, man. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be on the show, and I look forward to keeping in touch with you, and have a good rest of your day, man.
Absolutely. Thanks very much. Talk soon.
Thank you. Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. Please visit our website at buildingthefutureshow.com to join the free community, sign up for our newsletter, or to sponsor the show. The music is done by Electric Mantra. You can check him out at electricmantra.com and keep building the future.